All right, I need to talk to you about something that has been building in this case for weeks, and I want to be very clear from the start. This is not speculation. This is not a rumor. What I'm about to show you is a documented financial trail that runs directly through the heart of this entire investigation. Property records, legal instruments, police actions, and a conversation between a mother and daughter that, if ultimately verified, could be the single most crucial piece of information to emerge in this entire case. Because for many months, we've known how Nancy Guthrie was taking the surveillance footage, the cameras suddenly going dark, the figure at the door in a balaclava and double gloves, the ransom notes, and the minute-by-minute timeline of that night. We've already covered every part of the how in exhaustive detail, but the why behind all of it, the reason for executing this level of planning against an 84-year-old woman while she slept alone in her home, that has been the missing piece until now. According to a report published by the outlet Hidden Times, Annie Guthrie asked her mother for a loan shortly before Nancy disappeared on February 1st. Nancy allegedly said no. Let me stop right there because I want to be precise about what we know and what we still don't. That claim has not been confirmed by police. It has not been publicly addressed by the Guthrie family either. It has not been denied. But it dropped into the middle of a case where financial questions about Annie and her husband, Tommaso Cian, have been quietly building for months. Property values, the power of attorney, boxes leaving the house, and a vehicle held for 40 days. And this gave all of those questions something they didn't have before a starting point. So let's follow the money all the way through. Because when you line these documented details up in sequence, they stop looking random. They stop looking like a simple coincidence. They start to look like a pattern. Nancy Guthrie's home in Catalina Foothills is valued at approximately $1 million. That's a public record. It sits in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the entire Tucson area. Nancy lived there for decades. Annie and Tommaso's home is approximately 4 miles away. Its estimated value is around $650,000. There's a gap of roughly $350,000 between the two, between the mother's home and the daughter's home, the one who lived closest. Now, on its own, that gap means nothing. Parents often have more assets than their children. That's normal. But when trying to understand why someone would target Nancy so specifically, why this woman, why this house, why this extraordinary level of planning the value of her assets becomes relevant. Because the most common motive in cases where an elderly person is harmed by someone in their own circle is not rage, not passion, not revenge. It's access. Access to assets that become available when the owner is no longer there to protect them. Then there's the matter of the power of attorney. A document circulated showing that in May of 2025, 8 months before Nancy disappeared, Tommaso signed a durable power of attorney naming Annie as his agent for financial and property matters. Legal experts weighed in publicly. Several said it's standard, the kind of paperwork you sign during a mortgage refinancing or a property transfer. Routine business, nothing more. And maybe that's exactly all it represents. But the timing places it within a sequence that has a direction. May 2025. They signed the power of attorney. Sometime before January 31st. Annie allegedly asks Nancy for money and is turned down. January 31st. Nancy has dinner at Annie and Tommaso's home. Tommaso drives her home. February 1st. Nancy disappears. You can dismiss any single element of that sequence as coincidence, but the sequence itself has a direction, and that direction is financial. Now let's talk about what's happening at Nancy's house, because this raises questions that no one in the family has answered publicly. Photos recently emerged showing people at Nancy's residence loading items into multiple vehicles. Annie's Honda CR-V was visible in those images. Boxes were being removed from the home. Let me be very clear about the legal reality here. Nancy Guthrie has not been declared dead. There is no death certificate. No probate process has been initiated. No court has authorized anyone to remove personal property from that home. The home of a woman whose disappearance is still classified as an active criminal investigation. And yet, boxes are leaving that house. There's no confirmation that Annie and Tommaso plan to move into Nancy's home. But between the boxes leaving the property, the constant presence of Annie's vehicle, and the fact that Tommaso had already been seen walking through the house and garage with familiarity, on the same day, the ransom notes surfaced, people started connecting their own dots. And the picture forming is of a family preparing to take control of a property that legally does not belong to them, since its owner has not been declared dead. That is not a minor detail. It's not something that can be dismissed. If someone is removing belongings from the home of a missing person, that is a matter authorities are almost certainly already watching closely. And the fact that this is continuing without public intervention tells us one of two things. Either investigators are watching and documenting everything rather than stopping it, or there is an explanation that has not been disclosed. Neither of those possibilities is reassuring. Now, let's connect the financial thread with a completely new angle I want to address. Vulnerability. We've talked before about all the protections missing from Nancy's life before her disappearance. The dog that died and was never replaced. The camera system that wasn't actively recording, leaving her disconnected from the outside world. Along with that medication on the counter that the Pima sheriff described as potentially lethal. No overnight caregiver. No alarm system. No medical alert device on her wrist or around her neck. But here's the detail nobody has mentioned. Every single one of those missing protections cost almost nothing to fix. A camera subscription costs about $15 a month. A medical alert pendant less than $1 a day. An overnight aid through an agency in Tucson costs just a few $100s a week. These are not extraordinary expenses reserved only for the very wealthy. They are basic precautions that any family with elderly parents living alone implements as a matter of routine. That is the only barrier between an 84-year-old woman being protected or completely exposed. The Guthrie family had the resources. Savannah Guthrie is one of the highest-paid journalists in the country. The combined income of 3 adult siblings is more than enough to cover all of those security measures many times over, and none of it was done. Nancy was left in a $1 million home with no security cameras, no monitoring, no overnight help, and no way to call for help once she took out her hearing aids to go to sleep. In practical terms, she was completely unreachable and unprotected against any danger. Now consider the loan refusal. If Annie was in a financial position where she needed to ask her mother for money, then the question of why no one invested in protection for Nancy takes on a completely different dimension. It's no longer just a simple oversight. It becomes a situation where someone under financial pressure may not have seen it as a priority worth pursuing. Or, and this is the harder version of the situation, it becomes something they simply allowed to continue as it was. An unprotected mother in a $1 million home is far more vulnerable than one surrounded by alarm. I'm not saying this is a definitive conclusion. I'm only laying out the logic that the financial evidence invites the same logic that the most experienced investigators apply. Let's revisit the night of January 31st one more time, but this time through the lens of money and access. At 5:32 p.m., Nancy ordered an Uber. The driver took her to dinner at Annie and Tommaso's home. That trip is fully documented and verified. There are timestamps, vehicle recordings, and a driver who cooperated fully with the FBI. Everything about the trip to Annie's is on record. The return trip is not. Tommaso was behind the wheel that night. He decided the departure time. He chose the route. He determined the exact moment Nancy arrived at her front door, and his account of what happened at the door, walking her in and watching the garage close, has no other witnesses. No camera captured the arrival. No neighbor saw her. No app generated a digital timestamp. The only account of those final minutes before Nancy was alone inside her home comes from one person. If the loan refusal is real, that night carries a weight that goes far beyond a family dinner. It means the last person Nancy had dinner with was the daughter she had turned down. It means the last person to drive her home was the husband of the daughter Nancy had turned down. And it means that the 14 hours that followed, with no one checking on Nancy until the next afternoon, came after a conversation where a mother gave her own daughter a hard no. 14 hours. That is an extraordinary gap. Nancy was 84 years old and wore a pacemaker. She needed her medications by 10 o'clock at night, according to the sheriff. Missing a dose could have been fatal. She was about to take out her hearing aids, leaving her in total silence to whatever was happening around her. She was alone in a house with no cameras, no alarm, and no medical alert. The people who drove her home knew every one of those details. They had just spent the evening with her and lived only 4 miles away. From the moment that garage door closed until a friend called because Nancy didn't appear on the church live stream, there was total silence. Zero contact. In families with parents who live alone, the goodnight call is automatic, and the morning check-in is a routine. A 3-second text saying you got home safe is a simple gesture that only exists when there's genuine care. That ritual disappeared on the night of January 31st, creating the perfect window for someone to take Nancy without interruption. No interruptions, no surprise visits, no phone calls someone other than Nancy might have answered. A 14-hour block, where the only alarm was an empty chair that a friend noticed on the Sunday morning live stream. The financial perspective doesn't change the actual facts of the timeline. It changes what that timeline might mean. The absence of a goodnight call after dinner with mom looks very different if that daughter was just turned down for a loan. It stops looking like a simple oversight. It starts looking like a real withdrawal, the kind of withdrawal that follows an unresolved argument, or perhaps the kind of distance that serves an entirely different and darker purpose. Let's talk about the 911 call, because here the investigation reveals more by what it's hiding than by what it has released. The report of Nancy's disappearance has never been made public. Not the audio, not the transcript, not even a summary. In Arizona, these emergency recordings are typically public records available to everyone. The press can request them. In major disappearance cases, the audio usually leaks within days or even a few hours. After 3 months of investigation, no one knows what Annie said when she called to report that her mother was no longer at home. Retired Detective Bob Gilliam spoke about this directly on a talk show. He stated that the recording contains key information that police prefer to keep under wraps, so as not to compromise the progress of the criminal case. He said we shouldn't hold our breath waiting for that material to come out anytime soon. And then he dropped a line that carries far more weight than any other part of his official statement. He suggested the audio won't surface until a trial date is approaching. A trial. A detective with decades of experience does not use that word lightly. A trial means charges. It means there will be an arrest. It signals that, despite the silence and the apparent stalling over these 3 months, the direction of this investigation is clear. Everything is pointing toward a courtroom, and that call is being held back as critical evidence for that proceeding. Now, think about what could be in that audio that justifies keeping it sealed all this time. The obvious elements are Annie's voice, the time of the call, and her words, but there are also the less obvious details. How much did she describe before anyone asked her to? Did she describe what she found when she walked into that house? Did she mention the blood on the entryway? Did she reference specific things that only someone who had been there could have seen? Details a fresh witness shouldn't know yet. And then there's that mysterious 7-minute gap. The family arrived at 11:56 a.m. The emergency call was placed at 12:03 p.m. 7 minutes passed between arriving at the home of the missing woman and picking up the phone to call for police. If there was blood visible at the entrance in a place impossible to miss, what happened in those 7 minutes is highly suspicious. Were they checking the house? Were they calling each other? Were they getting their story straight before dialing? Did they touch something they shouldn't have? The recording likely captures what happened right before and during that critical call. Background sounds. Other voices. The emotional tone of whoever was speaking all of it remains under strict judicial seal. A detective with real experience says the reason for this level of secrecy is preparation for a future criminal trial. Now let's look at the DNA picture, because this is where the forensic investigation stands, and it's critical in light of everything we've just discussed. The search in CODIS, the National Law Enforcement DNA Database, already came back negative. That means whoever left biological material at Nancy Guthrie's home has never been through the criminal justice system. No prior arrests, no prior convictions. A completely clean criminal record. Think about what that rules out. It eliminates professional criminals and repeat offenders. It rules out anyone with a history of violence who is already in the system. The DNA profile investigators are working with belongs to someone who lives an ordinary life, someone whose name would not trigger any red flags in any database, someone who attends family dinners, someone capable of driving an elderly woman home, someone who signs legal documents and carries out real estate transactions. The hair sample found at Nancy's home was sent by the sheriff's office to a private lab. They sent it to Florida instead of the FBI lab at Quantico. It is now under analysis, with a level of sophistication that has solved crimes once considered impossible to crack. The San Francisco lab that helped convict Rex Hoyerman, the Long Island serial killer, has been mentioned in connection with this evidence. That facility specializes in forensic genetic genealogy. It's the technology that builds a family tree from a DNA sample in order to identify a living person. The process is slow and meticulous. It demands a patience the public is not prepared for. But it has never definitively failed when applied to high-quality biological evidence. If the hair found at Nancy's home has a root which allows for a complete genomic profile, then whoever left it in that house is already in a database they don't even know about. The CODIS result also carries a specific implication given everything we've analyzed. It describes someone with no criminal record, someone ordinary on paper, someone who wouldn't raise suspicion. That profile fits someone who had legitimate access to Nancy's everyday life. It matches someone who knew the house and had been there before. So where does the investigation stand right now? Because the silence from authorities is communicating something on its own. Sheriff Chris Nanos has not held a formal press conference in over a month. On May 1st, marking 3 months since Nancy's disappearance, he appeared in a short video. He believes someone out there knows what happened, and he is pleading with that person to call. That is the public posture of a department that is holding something it cannot yet reveal, or is managing an investigation at a stage where speaking publicly creates more problems than it solves. NBC News created a specific protocol on the Today Show for this case. If news about Nancy breaks during a live broadcast, they will pull Savannah off the set immediately. Another anchor will deliver the news on camera. The information will be given to Savannah privately and off-air. Reports say the protocol was activated on April 15th. They pulled Savannah mid-broadcast and she returned later. 2 days later, she was absent from the show entirely. Networks don't design these internal procedures for cases they think will go cold. They create them when they're expecting a key moment, an arrest, or a discovery. They are waiting for an identification that will hit in real time during a live national broadcast. The existence of that protocol is a form of preparation, and being prepared suggests a genuine expectation. NBC is expecting something to happen, and they have organized their newsroom to be ready when it does. Dr. Matthew Hines of the Pima County Board publicly accused Sheriff Nanos of obstructing cooperation with the FBI out of a personal grudge against the federal agency. An elected county official made that accusation publicly and has not walked it back. That is not the language of a routine interagency friction. It is a formal accusation from within the government itself. The person in charge of this investigation let his personal feelings interfere in a federal case involving the kidnapping of an 84-year-old woman. And Ed Smart, the father of Elizabeth Smart, appeared publicly and chose his words very carefully. He said the Guthrie family has allegedly been exonerated. That word, allegedly. It's the term you use when you respect an official position but leave a door open. You leave it open against the clear possibility that this may not be the final word on the case. Let's go through the financial thread one final time. In May 2025, a legal document was signed. It gave Annie authority over Tommaso's finances. Experts say it's common in real estate. Months before the kidnapping, Annie allegedly asked Nancy for a loan. We don't know the amount or the reason. Nancy says no. That refusal, if confirmed, is the first documented sign of serious financial tension between a mother and the daughter who would be the last person to see her alive. January 31st, 5:32 p.m. Nancy takes a recorded Uber to Annie and Tommaso's home for dinner. January 31st, around 9:50 p.m. Tommaso drives Nancy home. The ride leaves no trail whatsoever. No external cameras, no app records, no independent witnesses. The only account of that trip comes from Tommaso. From 9:50 p.m. to 12:03 p.m. the following afternoon. 14 hours and 13 minutes of complete silence. Not a single call, text, or visit from people living just 4 miles away. They had just spent the evening with a woman they knew would be alone, deaf, and dependent on medication that could be fatal if missed. February 1st, 1:47 a.m. The doorbell camera captures a masked figure on the porch. February 1st, 2:28 a.m. Nancy's pacemaker disconnects from her cell phone. She has been moved out of Bluetooth range of the nightstand, where she left her phone behind. February 1st, 12:03 p.m. The 911 call is made. Investigators are keeping it sealed. A retired detective with decades of experience says it likely contains key evidence being preserved for trial. February through March. Police seize Annie's Honda CR-V for over 40 days of forensic analysis. 40 days is not a normal processing time for the vehicle of someone who has been publicly exonerated. That is the timeline of a vehicle being analyzed for specific biological material or traces of physical evidence. April. Photos emerge of people removing items from Nancy's residence. Annie's vehicle is on the property. Nancy has not been declared dead. No legal process has authorized the removal of anything from that home. May. Public speculation surfaces that someone is planning to move into Nancy's house. The question circulates with no answer. That is the thread running through every phase of this case, from the legal document to the loan refusal, to the final dinner, the unrecorded ride home, the 14 hours of silence, and the sealed 911 call, to the vehicle held for 40 days and the property being emptied while its owner is still missing without a trace. Every element in that sequence has an innocent explanation. I want to acknowledge that directly and very clearly. A power of attorney can be routine paperwork. A dinner can be just a dinner. A ride home. A simple act of courtesy. A gap in phone calls can be an oversight. Boxes can be moved for legitimate preservation reasons. Every piece of this puzzle has a version where it means nothing on its own. But here's what I've learned covering this case. When every innocent explanation requires you to ignore the piece before it, when accepting each one individually requires you to pretend the sequence doesn't exist, those innocent explanations stop being probable. They become the hardest ones to believe. I am not accusing Nancy Guthrie or Tommaso Cian of anything. What I'm doing is following the evidence. And the leads take us to a financial trail that begins with a daughter asking for money and ends with boxes, leaving $1 million house before the law has declared its owner dead. The CODIS search came back with nothing. The DNA belongs to someone with no record, someone ordinary, someone living a normal life, someone who could have been in that house before, someone who could have sat at that same table. The 911 call is sealed. A retired detective says it will not be released until a trial date is set. A trial date. That is where all of this is headed. And when that moment comes, the conversation that started this mystery, a mother, a daughter, a request for money, and the word no could turn out to be the most pivotal exchange in this entire case. If you have information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. You can also contact the FBI directly. The reward remains at $1,200,000. Stay with us. We'll talk again soon.